Really, it just turns out they are misquoting something. Maybe you're reading it incorrectly. Maybe you're being deceptive. Joseph Taylor writes, as quoted by, quoted by, quoted by. Yeah, that's where we're at. Of course, by Gish, right? Cited in Dwayne T. Gish. And again, this is one of those things that because it's quoted in Lubenow, we can see Hank didn't even read it for himself. And we're supposed to check out Lubenow's book and see pages 113 to 119 for a good overview of the Selenka expedition. Why not just tell us to read the Selenka expedition? Or again, a good faith summary that's not found in a creationist article. Why is Hank using all of these really old sources? Why not just grab like a modern evolution textbook? Well, we know why.
What if this isn't exactly true? Where would that even leave me and you? If religion poisons everything, where is the antidote? Come drink the lemonade with me and raise all that they hold. Why would God create us evil and wrong and punish us from afar? They tell us we're broken to sell us secure, we're worthy as we are.
Welcome, cult members, loyal subscribers, and casual viewers alike. We're going to start the next part of the face that demonstrates the farce of evolution. But before we do that, let's get into reading your comments on the last video, because that is always much more informative and interesting than anything this book has to say. Michael Summers writes, I have Colin Patterson's book, Evolution, mentioned early in the video. It is a popular level book, not an academic one, from 1978. The book only spends a few pages on fossils. The rest covers other aspects of evolution, such as genetics and natural selection. On pages 132 to 133, he wrote, in several animal and plant groups, enough fossils are known to bridge the large gaps between existing types. In mammals, for example, the gap between horses, asses, and zebras, and their closest living relatives, is filled by an extensive series of fossils extending back 60 million years. There are many other examples of fossil, quote, missing links, unquote, such as Archaeopteryx. Then he wrote on page 133, obviously the passage referred to by Hanegraaff, quote, but there are still great gaps in the fossil record, end quote. Typical creationist dishonesty. An updated edition of this book is still in print. If you want anything else looked up in it, let me know. Well, Michael, I think if we could just get some of the quotes as they pop up, I think just at your leisure, any of this would be just greatly appreciated. This is the kind of thing that I was talking about, where we don't know what Hank is actually saying that these books are referring to. And whenever we're talking about this idea of evolutionist dishonesty, this is something that we see in Hank's book. This is also something that we saw in the Frank and Norm book. This idea that scientists, whether they are archaeologists, whether they're paleontologists, whether they're evolutionary biologists, just scientists in general, have this open secret that they're publishing all these books saying we don't know anything about anything, and that somehow everybody else is just confused and the wool was pulled over their eyes and they're believing it because Satan has tricked them into it. Really, it just turns out they are misquoting something. So as we saw in that book that we pulled up about the little, like the what was it, the fantastic egg or something like that child's book, this was something that was listed as a great hailing of how, I don't remember exactly how Frank or Hank phrased it, but it was something about punctuated equilibrium, about these great jumps, etc. And in reality, it was just kind of introducing Archaeopteryx. It had nothing, the way I read it at least, it didn't seem like anything Hank was insinuating that it was, or outright stating that it was supposed to be. So this, again, it makes you have to stop and think. If the people that are doing this for a living constantly, according to these creationists, are constantly saying there's no evidence for this and we can't prove this and there's really no reason for us to believe it, why are they in that field? That would be like a Christian saying, well, honestly, you know, God is so mysterious we can never know him. Yeah, there's stuff written down in the Bible, but is it really correct? You know, we can't really know. There's no way that a Christian would really be saying this, somebody who has a strong faith in the Christian beliefs. So if an atheist or Muslim or some other non-Christian quotes some Christian apologist as saying we actually know nothing about God and there's no ground on which we have to stand to make any of these claims to the opposite, then we probably probably should guess that the Christian is being misquoted, or that their quotes are being pulled really out of context, because why would this person be a Christian apologist if they're openly telling everybody, yeah, I don't actually know anything about God, Jesus, the Bible, etc. Nothing we say we can ever know with any degree of certainty, so, being Christian is just as good as being something else, right? No Christian apologist is going to say this. So to claim that they would, ridiculous. In the same vein, to claim that, oh, these people who study evolutionary biology all know that evolutionary biology is crap and all of this is openly published, therefore everybody else is just deceived except for me, Hank Hanegraaff, or except for me, Frank Turek and Norm Geisler. That's strange, isn't it? Maybe you're reading it incorrectly. Maybe you're being deceptive. So yeah, this is I think it just there's no way to wrap that up other than I think you're just being dishonest or you don't actually know what you're reading. Jeff Engel writes, quote, just add millions of years, end quote. Thinking about millions of years, things happen in millions of years. Lots of things. When lots of things happen, you can expect remarkable results. So this was a reference to Hank just dismissing the idea that evolution is, it sounds crazy, but if you just add millions of years, then now it's science. And this idea, as Jeff really succinctly put it, is that, yeah, if you give something enough time, things will happen. If you ask me to walk from one side of a continent to the other side of a continent, and you only give me 2 days to do it, I can't do that. You give me 5 years? Sure, that's totally doable. J.R. Pence writes, creation is left to assume that when things like feathers appeared, that they appeared in the same complexity as they exist in modern animals, instead of understanding that there are stages. I totally agree. There's that irreducible complexity argument that they like to bring up. This idea that something like the eye cannot exist in stages, when we actually can see it does exist in stages. There are separate animals even now that are developing proto-eyes or primitive eyes, just these parts of their body where there are cells that are photosensitive. So it is really cool to see these things still evolving in those stages even today. The other problem is that what I'm running into with Hank, this idea that if I see it as an animal, I see some other animal has a genetic advantage, I'm going to be able to change myself so that can somehow change my offspring. And this was something that I thought evolution said because I learned about evolution from places like Hank and the church. So I really thought that it was this idea that if an animal chooses to make these changes, that evolutionists, quote unquote, or evolutionists, are saying that this somehow gets imprinted on their DNA and passed on. And I thought, well, we know that's not true. This is ridiculous. Well, yeah, it is ridiculous, but the ridiculous part is that the Christians are claiming this is what evolution says. That part was ridiculous. And again, I didn't know because these guys were my source of evolutionary biology, and that was just an error. Oceanus Helios gives us a fun joke here. People might remember Piltdown Man and Nebraska Man, but nobody ever mentions the uncanny case of the Florida Man and the Texas Man. Both of these skeletons, when exhumed at the digs, were found to have lived their whole lives with craniofecal impaction. The hypothesis was that it was caused by child-onset Dunning-Kruger syndrome. These are unrare cases for the newer hypothesis of human devolution. Great channel and content, by the way. Thank you so much for that comment. I think this definitely explains what's going on with some of the authors we've read. Super Chicken writes, maybe I misunderstood him, but if not, it's really strange that Gish cites, quote, lots of birds having teeth and having claws on their wings, end quote, as a point against the saurian lineage of birds. I agree. I think sometimes they don't realize what they're saying. Now, they did explain a little bit that, oh, well, these are bird teeth, not dinosaur teeth. But especially if we don't see a lot of bird teeth today, why would they have teeth in the past and not now? And then not this idea, and somehow evolution didn't get involved. That's the weird issue here. Garrett Valkering writes, the reason he picks all those fringe evolution ideas is to set up his false dichotomies. It's either this weird evolution thing or creation. For obvious reasons, none of them want to give a fair representation of evolution. This is 100% correct. And this was something that I struggled with as a Christian, because when I would get, when I got older and I got into these discussions with atheists, they would say things like, well, nobody actually believes that, because I would quote Christians about atheists or Christians about evolution, and I'd say stuff like, well, evolution says we came from monkeys, for example, and no, it doesn't. So when this was challenged to me, I felt that I had to look up the actual information. Maybe I misunderstood, maybe the person who was telling this to me misunderstood, but if this isn't what these atheists believe, well, I want to know what these atheists believe, because God is so true that none of this is going to challenge my faith whatsoever. That anything I find, it's easily going to be explained away with God and the Bible. They're easily going to refute whatever this is, because obviously God is the truth and everything else is not. So to me, the idea of needing to go into fringe beliefs or these, or to have to misrepresent the other person with a straw man argument, for example, to me, there was no reason to do that, because God obviously is right. And this led me to being challenged, and I had to read my Bible more to find answers for this, and that's when I thought, all right, let's just read the whole thing. And yeah, I wasn't Christian by the end of the reading. I think the way you pronounce this is D Israeli Demon. At 10 minutes, Colin Patterson and Transitional Forms. It's notable this quote is from 1975, considering there's been an explosion of new fossil species discovered since the late 1980s. Pattinson's comment could well have been true, assuming that the exact question was, do we have examples of transitional fossils between two specific species X and Y? Now, I really like this, because the first comment we read actually showed exactly this. The fossil record is generally pretty indeterminate at the species level. For specimens too old to contain DNA, it's impossible to say if two given species are in a direct line or more likely cousins, making it impossible to tell if any particular species is directly intermediate between others. When you zoom out to the family level, however, you do see a gradient of transitional forms as predicted by the theory of evolution, even if you can't say who is directly related to whom. It's also worth noting that since the 70s, enough new fossils have surfaced that paleontologists can be pretty confident of direct intermediates in the line of ceratopsian dinosaurs, and I think possibly some early jellyfish. I really appreciate this comment, and I'm glad that I'm not the only one that had this thought here. There's a reason that Hank keeps pulling quotes from books that are 30 years old or more at the time of this publication in the early 2000s. This is a time before we were able to even do DNA testing on crime scenes, for example, because we just didn't have the information and technology where it needed to be. Why is Hank using all of these really old sources? And I think it's pretty obvious. Hank is digging them out because he doesn't have anything new that's going to support him. It's one of the same reasons that Frank and Norm and Hank as well, they keep going back to early 1900s. They keep going back to the late 1800s. They keep going back to Darwin, even though there's been so many more additions to biology beyond Darwin. For some reason, they keep going back to this. And one of the pieces of the acronym FACE, and then there's the R that gets inserted. One of them is going to talk about this thing that Darwin's bulldog talked about, that he had deliberately drawn different embryonic stages from different animals in a distorted kind of way and presented it with phylogeny recapitulates something. I forget exactly how it's phrased in the book. I don't know if it's the next chapter, but yeah, it's we'll get there. And at the time I just thought, wow, how did this get exposed so early on? Like, it was exposed within the lifetime of this fraudster, right? And yet somehow this continued to be believed even today when I was reading the book at that time. How could something that was obviously a fraud and everybody knew it was a fraud, they still believe this? Wow, they really have some kind of vendetta against God, that they are accepting this completely false stuff that they know is completely false. On the other side now, as an atheist, it's pretty obvious the reason they're pulling this up is to try to make it look like these are dishonest people, so we shouldn't believe them, completely ignoring that nobody uses this, number one. And number two, if anybody wanted to use this, we could just easily show them why it's wrong. It's a bizarre argument to pull some hoax from the 1800s as a reason that all of the findings from evolutionary biology in the past century somehow don't matter, that they're not true, they can't be substantiated in any way because this one guy at this time, more than 100 years ago, played a scam. That's so bizarre to use. Why not just grab like a modern evolution textbook? Well, we know why. So we'll end with these three. Here's one from Jason Henderson at 1827. This is completely false. Even for 25 years ago, he's just lying. I'm glad that I'm not the only one that's picking up on this. Again, I don't have a huge background in biology. I just have enough biology as it applies to what I had to study. This is not a huge part of my formal studies or my job experience or anything. And that's why I'm doing this. I'm doing this to show that you don't need to be an expert to immediately catch why all the things that Hank is saying is incorrect. I really appreciate when there are people who do this for a living, making YouTube channels and helping us out to understand things like evolutionary biology. That's awesome. But the reason that I'm doing it this way is because I would guess Hank and I probably have the same level of understanding of evolutionary biology, and we've come to two totally opposite ideas on the matter. Joseph Taylor writes, as quoted by. Yeah, that's where we're at. Of course, by Gish, right? And finally, R. Chapman writes, time to drink some lemonade after listening to all this nonsense. Absolutely. That is the cure to having drank the Kool-Aid, drink the lemonade. Let's go ahead and get started with the next chapter. All right, so chapter 3 is Ape Men, Fiction, Fraud, and Fantasy. Now, I did see the subheadings here, so I have an idea what this is about. So I'm not going to make my prediction because I think that kind of defeats the purpose. What do you think they're going to talk about? Go ahead and pause, leave it in the comments here, and some of you have apologized for commenting so much. Please don't. The more comments, the better. I love reading what you guys have to say, and it also helps us with the almighty algorithm. Well, let's go ahead and get our glasses on for this. In 1922, a tooth was discovered in Nebraska. With a little imagination, the tooth was connected to a mythological jawbone. The jawbone was connected to a skull, the skull was connected to a skeleton, and the skeleton was given a face, features, and fur. By the time the story hit a London newspaper, not only was there a picture of Nebraska Man, but there was also a picture of Nebraska Mom, all from that single solitary tooth. Imagine what might have happened if a skeleton had been discovered. Perhaps a yearbook would have been published. Ha ha ha. I like that last part doesn't have a footnote because it means that Hank came up with that all by himself. And I'm not saying that as an insult to Hank. It's just every time we've run into these little jabs and jokes, either in his book or in the Frank and Norm book, they're always saying, oh, this was first published this way by this other guy, or this is a version of the same joke that was made up by this apologist. They can't even be original in making up their own jokes and jabs. Let's see what this footnote is here. Illustrated London News, 24 June 1922, cited in Dwayne T. Gish, Evolution, the Fossils Still Say No, 1995. You know, let's look it up. This is one of those things where it's old enough that it should have something for us. So I do want to say the first things that are popping up are creation websites. Creation.com, Creation Wiki, wayoflife.org, Lying Evolutionary Art, Nebraska Man. Let's see, this one looks like it might be an image. Okay, well, for some reason it's off-center, but that's all right. Earliest man tracked by a tooth, the astounding discovery of human remains in the Pliocene. I'm assuming that says stratum. And that's all it is, it's just an image. There's no... A prehistoric Columbus who reached America by land, an artist version of Hesperorthopithecus, the ape man of the Western world, and contemporary something something. Okay. Well, I don't see Nebraska Mom, so not sure where that shows up because it's all quoted from Gish. And I also don't see the rest of this article. I want to see the article. Creationist arguments, Nebraska Man, Talk Origins. Let's see what Talk Origins has to say about it. Human-like tooth. Further excavations, it shows the tooth belonged to a peccary, an animal similar to and closely related to pigs. The true story is much more complex. So Harold Cook, a rancher and geologist from Nebraska, found the tooth in 1917, and in 1922 he sent it to Henry Fairfield Osborn, a paleontologist and the president of the American Museum of Natural History. Osborn identified it as an ape and quickly published a paper identifying it as a new species, which he named Hesperopithecus haroldcooki. Oh, come on. I mean, at least be fun with it, like the Sonic Hedgehog gene. The imaginative drawing of Nebraska Man, to which creationists invariably refer, was a work of an illustrator collaborating with the scientist Grafton Elliott Smith, and was done for a British popular magazine, not for a scientific publication. Few, if any other scientists claimed Nebraska Man was a human ancestor. A few, including Osborn and his colleagues, identified it only as an advanced primate of some kind. Osborn, in fact, specifically avoided making any extravagant claims about Hesperopithecus being an ape man or human ancestor. I have not stated that. I'm just going to say H. Cook. H. Cook was either an ape man or in the direct line of human ancestry, because I consider it quite possible that we may discover anthropoid apes with teeth closely imitating those of man. So I'm assuming something that might correlate to, I don't know, Bigfoot. Until we secure more of a definition or parts of the skull or the skeleton, we cannot be certain whether H. Cook was a member of the Simidae or the Hominidae, or the anthropoid apes or humans. Most of the other scientists were skeptical even of the more modest claim that the H. Cook took or belonged to a primate. It is simply not true that Nebraska Man was a widely accepted as an ape man or even as an ape by scientists, and its effect upon the scientific thinking of the time was negligible. For example, in his 2-volume book, Human Origins, published during what was supposedly the heyday of Nebraska Man in 1924, George McCurdy dismissed Nebraska Man in a single footnote. In 1920, Osborn described 2 molars from the Pliocene of Nebraska. He attributed these to an anthropoid primate, to which he has given the name H. Cook. The teeth are not well preserved, so that validity of Osborn's determination has not yet generally been accepted. Gregory confirmed this in an article which correctly identified the tooth. The scientific world, however, was far from accepting without further evidence the validity of Professor Osborn's conclusion that the fossil tooth from Nebraska represented either a human or an anthropoid tooth. Identifying the tooth as belonging to a higher primate was not as foolish as it sounds. Pig and peccary cheek teeth are extremely similar to those of humans, and the specimen was worn, making identification even harder. Now, I was actually going to mention that I'm not surprised that it came from a pig or a peccary, because we still today use pigs as a stand-in for humans for things like testing flame retardant materials. So materials that are said to be flame retardant that need to be tested, they're put on a pig carcass, and then they're set on fire just to see how long it'll take before it causes any damage to the skin, because it's so similar. The other thing that is kind of interesting, if you're okay with animals being harmed, is there's a thing that's called pig school. I don't know if they still do this. They discontinued it for a while, but this was for at least Navy corpsmen. A Navy corpsman is a naval equivalent of something like a medic in the Army. I don't know if Army medics do this, but at least the Navy corpsmen were given this option, and this was to do something called pig school. It was a nickname, but basically it was for field medicine. So this way they could apply dressings and tourniquets and how to find a vein if somebody is dehydrated, that sort of thing. And at the end of this course, they take a live pig, totally drugged up, doesn't feel anything, isn't consciously aware of what's happening, and they shoot it and they stab it several times. And then your goal is to try to keep this pig alive as long as possible, because there's so many similarities in the pig and human build, which is pretty interesting. I wonder what creationists would say about that there's so many similarities between something that we wouldn't even consider a human ancestor. What's the reason God would make us so similar to pigs? So we see the illustration that we actually found in that previous website. Creationists often ridicule this Nebraska Man illustration of 2 human-like but extremely bestial creatures, as done by Amity Forestier for the Illustrated London News. They rightly point out that an animal cannot be reconstructed from one tooth, but the drawing was not a reconstruction and was never intended or claimed to be an accurate or scientific, being based more on the Java Man fossil than the tooth. Smith emphasized the following quote was both in the main text and below the drawing, its speculative nature. Mr. Forestier has made a remarkable sketch to convey some idea of the possibilities suggested by this discovery. As we know nothing of the creature's form, his reconstruction is merely the expression of an artist's brilliant imaginative genius. But if, as the peculiarities of the tooth suggested, H. Cook was a primitive forerunner of the Pithecanthropus, he may have been a creature such as Mr. Forster has depicted. Osborne, who had named H. Cook, was less impressed with Forster's artistic efforts and remarked that such a drawing or reconstruction would doubtless be only a figment of imagination of no scientific value and undoubtedly inaccurate. This is quoted in Wolf and Mellett, quoting Osborne in 1985. Smith may have been the only major scientist who was enthusiastic about Nebraska man's hominid status, but even he, in his 1927 book The Evolution of Man, was much more cautious than he had been in the London article. Although he stated that, "I think the balance of probability is in favor of the view that the tooth found in the Pliocene beds of Nebraska may have possibly belonged to a primitive member of the human family," Smith also recognized that it was questionable and admitted that the suggestion that the Nebraska tooth may possibly indicate the existence of mankind in early Pliocene times is, as I've explained in the foreword, still wholly tentative. The claim that real men were in existence in Pliocene and Miocene times must be regarded as mere hypothesis unsupported as yet by any adequate evidence. This is in 1927. Creationists often claim that Nebraska man was used as proof of evolution during the Scopes monkey trial in 1925, but this claim is apocryphal. No scientific evidence was presented at the trial. Some evidence was read into the trial record, but this did not refer to a Nebraska man. Nor is it true, as Ian Taylor in 1995 has said, that the retraction of the original identification was not publicized and never made the headlines. Bowden, 1981, similarly states that little publicity was given to the discovered error. In fact, the New York Times and the Times of London both announced the news. The New York Times put it on the front page, and both also printed editorials about it. Taylor's other claim that the retraction was announced in the scientific literature in only 4 lines in the back pages of Nature is almost correct. It was 16 lines, but is highly deceptive since it conceals the fact that 1.5-page article retracting the claim was printed in the prestigious journal Science. Moreover, Taylor should have known about this article because it was referenced by the item in Nature to which he did refer. So this is kind of showing that quote mining thing, where this is being claimed, hey, here's this piece from this source that says this thing about how bad evolutionists are, and they didn't even blah blah blah. And now what we're reading here is, no, they did include all this information. Taylor is just being disingenuous. Nebraska man should not be considered an embarrassment to science. The scientists involved were mistaken and somewhat incautious, but not dishonest. The whole episode was actually an excellent example of scientific process working at its best. Given a problematic identification, scientists investigated further, found data which falsified their earlier ideas, and promptly abandoned them, a marked contrast to the creationist approach. Great. This is fantastic. So thank you so much with this information. Going back to the Hank writing, sometime after the initial discovery, an identical tooth was found by geologist Harold Cook. This time the tooth was attached to an actual skull, and the skull was attached to the skeleton of a wild pig. I remember reading this as a Christian, and I was just like, ha ha ha, those foolish evolutionists. Thus, Nebraska man, known by the scientific designation of H. Cook, has been unmasked as a myth rather than a man in the making. So even just reading this without having read what we just read on Talk Origins, it just seems like, okay, so somebody had an idea and they turned it possibly into a hypothesis, and then that hypothesis was falsified. That's science, that's how it works. But for Christians, when you falsify something, that's them thinking science is just making these things up. Remember, this is a group of people that tend to, remember this particular subset of Christians, not all Christians. That's what I mean by this group of people. They have this idea that theory in science is just a guess, that it's maybe a good guess, an educated guess, but still just a guess, that science is just a bunch of guessing. And that is definitely not the case. We understand what a scientific theory really is. Again, I mentioned it in the previous video that for my students, I emphasize when they do an experiment for the AP psychology class that they need a falsifiable hypothesis, and if the hypothesis is false, that is the conclusion, that is the discussion, that is the data. Do not go back and try to make it seem like your hypothesis was something different based on the results. because the results are the results and your hypothesis is your hypothesis, the end. Sometimes in science, the hypothesis is falsified, and that is information that does get us a step closer to understanding the thing that we're trying to study. These are not wrong answers. If you do this, your hypothesis is found to be false, you're not going to lose any points. If your hypothesis is one thing and then you change it after you've submitted it to me because you feel weird or bad that your hypothesis was falsified, you will lose points because that's not how science is performed. But it's totally fine for you guys to falsify. That's part of science. So this idea here, even without all of the context that we read, yeah, sometimes we have an idea and then it's changed. How is this like a shot in the heart to evolution? I don't. Ironically, while scientists were attempting to make a monkey out of a pig, so again, this is a misunderstanding of human evolution. The pig made a monkey out of the scientist. Ha ha ha. For some reason, there's a footnote. Adapted from Gish 328. So that means that Hank didn't even come up with this joke, but it was so delicious. He had to include it. We also have factual information adapted from Gish. Why do we have to say it's factual information? Interesting. This is for the next one when we get to it. Martin Lubenow explains that Dubois may well have concealed the discovery of the Wajak skulls, declaring them only in bureaucratic reports that were not intended for the public or the scientific community. So this must be what was being mentioned in that talk Origins. While one would think this blunder would preclude the possibility of similar fantasies, a parade of pretenders continues to persist. What do we mean continues? How many of you were taught about Nebraska Man as part of human evolution? Because I sure don't remember that. Pithecanthropus erectus, I'm going to call him PE. Okay. Speculation about PE, the ape man that walked erect, is far and away the most famous ape man fiction that is still circulated as fact. So for my history and AP World History classes, I have to mention human ancestors. I have to mention that. This is not in the book at all. And the book itself wasn't written much after this book, maybe 10, 15 years later. I can't imagine. I mean, when we talk about Homo erectus, we don't talk about Pithecanthropus. That's why I'm calling it PE, because I don't have the practice with this word like I do with Neanderthal, for example, or Cro-Magnon, right? So Pithecanthropus erectus, what do we got? Well, over time he has evolved into a new classification called Homo erectus. Now, okay, is this the case? And this is the problem where now I don't even know if we can just take his word for it. Notice there's no footnote here. So this idea about Pithecanthropus being circulated as fact now, and that Pithecanthropus turned into Homo erectus. Millions regard him as a friendly ancestor, not just a fossil, and simply refer to him by the nickname Java Man. What do you mean millions regard him as a friendly ancestor? Do they think? I mean, yeah, they do, because I was raised in this. But they really think that we atheists see the human evolution, this chain of human evolution, as like just part of the family tree. You know, that if a Neanderthal showed up one day, we would just say, oh yeah, this is my super distant cousin, you know, so come on and join the festivities today, uncle, you know, or something. It's just it's so bizarre. Like we have pictures of them hanging with the family or something. I think I'm gonna do that. I might put like a photo of Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon and all this. I think maybe I should do that so I can play into this fantasy they have. Obviously, we like to have fantasy fun here. It is generally known that Java Man was initially discovered by a Dutchman named Eugene Dubois in the Dutch East Indian island of Java in 1891. What is not so well known is that Java Man consists of nothing more than a skull cap, a femur, 3 teeth, and a great deal of imagination. Also, the femur, it's mentioned here, in parentheses, a thigh bone. Does Hank really think that his readers don't know what a femur is? Even more disturbing is the fact that the femur was found 50 feet from the skull cap and a full year later. I don't know why that's disturbing. Most unsettling of all is that for almost 30 years, Dubois downplayed his discovery of 2 human skulls, the Wajak skulls, which he found in close proximity to his original finds. This alone should have been sufficient to disqualify Java Man as humankind's ancestor. And so this is the footnote that we read in advance. The famous evolutionist, Sir Arthur Keith, drove this point home in a humorous fashion. Why would it be humorous? they found the femur, not the humerus. If, on his return in 1894, Dubois had placed before the anthropologist of the time an ape-like skull from Trinil, the skull of Java man, side by side with the great-brained skulls of Wajak, both fossilized in the same region of Java, he would have given them a meal beyond the powers of their mental digestion. Since then, our digestions have grown stronger. Okay, so what do we have for Sir Arthur Keith? The Antiquity of Man, 1925, as quoted in Lubenow, 102. We're going to see several from Lubenow. The Bone Peddlers, Selling Evolution. Oh, we got a Lemonic. Not a full lemon, but a Lemonic. So Sir Arthur Keith, The Antiquity of Man. And again, this is one of those things that because it's quoted in Lubenow, we can see Hank didn't even read it for himself. This is the problem. So Marvin Lubenow writes The Bones of Contention, a creationist assessment of human fossils in 1992. Clearly a creationist source. When Hank is trying to talk about the follies of evolution, he should go to the evolution source. He should go to Sir Arthur Keith's book, not as quoted by a creationist. That doesn't make any sense. And so again, we don't have even Hank reading the full quote or the full context, the full article, the full book. We have him reading nothing like that. We just have him reading some other creationist book. To me, that's where this gets a little weird because he's citing so many other creationist books. Why should we read yours? You know, this just seems more like a cash grab than anything else. What are you adding to the story if they already wrote it? If you're just quoting a bunch of different creationists, what are you adding? You're not saying that this was quoted by Lubenow, but when I looked it up from the original source, it actually gave a little bit more context. And so when we look at this context, which we shouldn't be afraid of because our faith is strong, it says this, this, and this. And so that may be more fair to the evolutionists, but we know it's wrong because some creationist argument. That would be adding something new to the discussion. But instead saying, I took this from a guy who took this from a guy, well then I'll just read it from the second guy. Why do I have to read it from the third? So we just have a little illustration here, which, you know, whatever, it's fine. Keith, of course, was speaking tongue-in-cheek to underscore the fact that those in his own profession have become increasingly gullible. In truth, the most thorough fact-finding expedition ever conducted on Java Man utterly demolished Dubois' claims. This trek, commonly referred to as the Selenka Expedition, included 19 evolutionists bent on demonstrating that the evolutionary conjectures about Java Man were true. However, their 342-page scientific report, which, according to Keith, quote, commands our unstinted praise, end quote, demonstrates beyond the peradventure of a doubt that the Java Man played no part in human evolution. And again, this is from Lubenow, and we're supposed to check out Lubenow's book and see pages 113 to 119 for a good overview of the Selenka expedition. Why not just tell us to read the Selenka expedition? Or again, a good faith summary that's not found in a creationist article. So I decided just to go on a little tour to see, is the claim that Hank made correct at the beginning here, that we have this little bit of evidence of Pithecanthropus erectus and it just evolved into a new classification called Homo erectus, the end. And of course, no, that is not the case. There have been multiple findings in multiple parts of the world coming out of Africa to show that these are, yes, a step in evolution. This is its own species, and they used fire, which was pretty cool. It does cite Pithecanthropus erectus as one of the first fossils that were found. The other one was found not too long after in China. Anytime I try to look up, did Pithecanthropus erectus get disproven, it just gives me a bunch of Answers in Genesis sites. That is kind of interesting, I think, because what we see here is that when Hank is saying that this was, the reason Hank is saying that Pithecanthropus erectus is not a human ancestor is because there were other skulls found nearby. That's pretty much it. And he's saying that this should have been sufficient to disqualify it as humankind's ancestor because these human skulls were also found of similar, they were both fossilized and they were found in the same region of Java. So therefore, these two couldn't have coexisted because if one is leading into the other, they couldn't have coexisted. Which I think is not only not evidence against Pithecanthropus erectus being early Homo erectus, right? I don't think it's evidence against that, and I also think it's evidence for Hank not understanding that it wasn't that one became the other and then the original ceased to exist. I wonder if Hank is going to touch on this. I don't remember from the book reading back in the 2000s. I wonder if Hank is going to touch on that humans, that Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis existed at the same time. I think he believes that they just become the next one. I don't think he understands that it's not a step, and then when you go to the next step, your feet are off the original step. I don't think he understands that. It's a bit bizarre. It's a bit bizarre that this is how he thinks. Also, again, this is one person at the time in 1894 saying, hey, I think this is not true. All right, cool. But you already cited a scientist, quote unquote, an evolutionist, that believed a thing and was wrong. So now you're citing another evolutionist who believed a thing and he's right. This is where the problem comes in from Hank and from other people that are in Hank's group. They are only using it when it's useful to them. So they're only using quotes from quote unquote evolutionists. They're only using quotes from scientific texts when they feel like it works for them. As soon as it doesn't work for them, it's a lie, it's from Satan, whatever. So this is where the problem also comes in, is this idea that one scientist saying something is law. This idea that because one person had the idea of Nebraska Man, everybody believed it. And because one person says that, hey, I don't think these fossils are a human ancestor, then everybody has to accept that. As if this isn't a community of researchers working to find information. So I don't think that Hank has proposed anything, just even in his writing, that would say, oh yeah, we should get rid of this concept, that this is disproven. Even more incredible, despite all the evidence, it is truly amazing that Time magazine printed How Man Began, an article that shamelessly treated Java Man as though it were a true evolutionary ancestor. So let's check out the footnote. So I was able to find this by Michael D. Lemonick, How Man Began, and it is talking about, Neanderthal, this, that, and the other thing. And it just looks like it's, hey, since we've got these new techniques and this new technology, we're checking stuff out, and it turns out some of the stuff is older than we thought. So for one of these quotes, it says, the latest shocker comes in the current issue of Nature, where Chinese scientists have contended that the skull of a modern-looking human found in their country a decade ago is at least 200,000 years old, more than twice as old as any Homo sapien specimen ever found in that part of the world. Moreover, the skull has features resembling those of contemporary Asians. The controversial implication, modern humans may not have evolved just in Africa, as most scientists believe, but may have emerged simultaneously in several regions around the globe. So this, of course, is before we found out how old humans are as a species, but it is interesting. Again, it's just this idea that as we're learning, this is what it could imply. We have to check this now. We now have a hypothesis. We have to see if it pans out. The Nature article came only a week after an even more surprising report in the competing journal Science. U.S. and Indonesian researchers said they had redated fossil skull fragments found at two sites in the island of Java. Instead of being 1 million years old, as earlier analysis suggested, the fossils appeared to date back to 2 million years. They are from the species known as Homo erectus, the first primate to look anything like modern humans, and the first to use fire and create sophisticated stone tools. Says F. Clark Howell, an anthropologist at the University of California, Berkeley, quote, this is just overwhelming. No one expected such an age. If the evidence from Java holds up, it means that proto-humans left their African homeland hundreds of thousands of years earlier than anyone had believed, long before the invention of advanced stone tools that, according to current textbooks, made the exodus possible. It would also mean that Homo erectus had plenty of time to evolve into two different species, one African and one Asian. Now, this we kind of understand the quote-unquote Asian DNA that gets in there is the Denisovan. That's what we understand it as of right now. Most researchers are convinced that the African branch of the family evolved into modern humans, but what about the Asian branch? Did it die out? Or did it also give rise to Homo sapiens, as the new Chinese evidence suggests? So again, hey, this is a hypothesis. Confidence is much stronger in the ages put in the Indonesian Homo erectus fossils. The leaders of the team that did the analysis, blah, 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 says Alan Walker, Johns Hopkins University, an expert on early humans. The IHO is doing world-class stuff. Okay, so what? It's not helping us out here. Get the same errors in both places. The inescapable conclusion, Swisher maintains, is that Homo erectus left Africa nearly 1 million years earlier than previously thought. We got Homo habilis. Homo erectus was an extraordinarily successful and mobile group, so well traveled in fact that the fossils from the species were first found thousands of miles away from its original home in Africa. In the 1890s, Eugene Dubois, an adventurous Dutch physician, joined his country's army as an excuse to get to the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia. Dubois agreed with Charles Darwin's idea that early humans and great apes were closely related. Since the East Indies had orangutans, Dubois thought they might have the fossils of the missing link. While Dubois didn't find anything like Lucy, he did discover some intriguingly primitive fossils, a skull cap and a leg bone, in eroded sediments along the Solo River in Java. They looked partly human, partly simian, and Dubois decided that they belonged to an ancient race of ape men. He called this creature Anthropopithecus erectus. Its popular name was Java man. Over the next several decades, comparable bones were found in China, Peking man, and finally in 1950s in Africa. Gradually, anthropologists realized that all these fossils were coming from creatures so similar they could be assigned to a single species, Homo erectus. So this is where it quote-unquote turned into Homo erectus, which Hank stated but never cited. So here we actually find this, which is interesting because this is the article I looked up because Hank cited the article somewhere else. So it's a little bizarre he didn't just cite the same article. Interesting. Kind of makes me wonder if he read the article. So this looks interesting. I'm gonna share it with you guys. If you check out the details section below, all of the links to the stuff that we're looking at will be there. But it doesn't actually seem to support what Hank is trying to say. Shocker, right? Shamelessly treated Java man as though it were a true evolutionary ancestor. That's what it says. So an article that shamelessly treated Java man as though it were a true evolutionary ancestor. Reading what I've read from that article, do you think this is a shameless treatment that it's a true evolutionary ancestor? I would very much disagree with how this is characterized, not only because it's just mentioned, but also because it's mentioned in conjunction with. So it's not saying that it is Java man and that's it. It's saying, oh look, so we found this and there's also some pretty similar ones in like China and Africa, and hey, it looks like they actually could be part of the same species. Let's call it Homo erectus. It's not saying this skull cap and femur are the only evidence we have and it is this thing. That's what Hank is trying to make us think. But if we just read the article that he cited, it doesn't say that at all. Oh my goodness. I wonder if he read it or if he read it from somebody else. Even more incredible is the fact that Donald Johnson, best known for his discovery of the famous fossil named Lucy after the Beatles' tune Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, still regards Java man as a valid transitional form, and Harvard's Richard, well see the problem is now it's not Java man. It's like a species, it's Homo erectus. And Harvard's Richard Lewontin thinks this information about Java man should be taught as one of the 5 facts of evolution. And we have Henry M. Morris and Gary E. Parker, What is Creation Science? And page 154. So we're not even getting as quoted in. We're just getting, this is what these guys said. Fantastic. So again, I don't think anything that Hank has provided is actually an argument against Java man. And I also think that Hank doesn't understand the article that he cited, because if he did, he would understand that this is not one skull cap, 3 teeth, and a femur, and then we've created this whole human ancestor out of it. This is loads of other evidence that there is this species. One of them is from Java, and oh, it looks like it's 2 million years old. That's really cool. Cool. So this is clunky. If Hank submitted this as like an assignment to me, I would say you need to delete this. This does not make the argument that you think it makes. And if this student Hank needed help with explaining why, I would tell him what we told him. Yeah, and I've had students do that. There was a student who had a narrative that they really wanted to push. So they started citing stuff based on a Google search. I could just tell because I asked them, did you read all 88 pages of this what was it? Some kind of environmental air quality report from the Balkan region. I'm like, did you really read this? And the student said, yes, I did. And I said, okay, so did you read the part here on the page that you cited that says the exact opposite of what you've written? And the student was, what do you mean? I said, well, it says the opposite. And I said, because I told the student you can't just make these statements, you need to support it with evidence. So I will not accept this until you support it with in-text citations and a works cited page. So the student already had this idea, and that's how I knew the student already had this idea. They resubmitted it with these sources, quote unquote, but when you read the sources, it actually showed the exact opposite of what the student was trying to say. It's just the student had this narrative they already believed, and they didn't want to do the work to verify if that was true. I asked the student where they got this idea. They said that their dad told them this is true because their dad does, I don't know, something slightly related to this topic, and that's why they chose the topic, because they already knew information about it. Therefore, they didn't have to think a lot about it. They could just answer the questions and submit the writing. That was it. The student was very honest, which I appreciated. The problem was the dad was not right, or the student's understanding of what the dad said was not right. And if the student would have just taken the time to actually read what they said, back them up, they would have found out it doesn't actually support you. And that's what I'm having deja vu with this. Hank's book, as a grown adult, trying to convince people of something that he's not an expert in, but for some reason decided to write a book about. It should not remind me of the work of a 15-year-old who just didn't want to do his homework. Do you know what I mean? The fact that I get that flashback of a 15-year-old who admittedly did not want to do their homework when I read something that Hank wrote, that's a problem. That's a big problem. I'm going to take these glasses off. One of the problems with doing this is the migraines will show up. So I'll do my best to, let's make this text a little bit bigger. Here we go. I have two things counting against me. I've got the wig and I've got the glasses. Both of those things will unfortunately sometimes trigger migraines. Piltdown Man. Just go ahead and pause. What do you think is going to be said about Piltdown Man? Because this is one of those famous creationist citing of why evolution's wrong. While the Java Man can best be placed in the category of fiction, Piltdown Man may be factually described as a fraud. Well, good. Hopefully, like recognizes like. Let's find out if Hank can recognize a fraud. While the fraud may have been cleverly conceived, it was crudely carried out. Well, then it wasn't clever. The jaw of an ape was stained to make it appear as though it matched a human skull. The Piltdown fossils, along with the accompanying bones, were not only stained, but also reshaped. Let's check out his footnote. This is also from Lubenow. What a surprise. As Marvin Lubenow explains, the file marks on the orangutan teeth of the lower jaw were clearly visible. The molars were misaligned and filed at two different angles. The canine tooth had been filed at two different angles. The canine tooth had been filed down so far the pulp cavity had been exposed and then plugged. Let's see where this comes from. This comes from Lubenow again. So who is Lubenow? Why not just go to the original source? Did Lubenow himself make this discovery? If not, then this is not a source you can quote from. I mean, this is this is this is stuff that I tell my adolescent students. These are the mistakes they make. You are a whole grown adult that is trying to come off as some kind of authority, Hank. Shouldn't you know better? Or do you need to take my class too? Ugh. So an image that we have here is just a bunch of dudes sitting around some skulls. So I can appreciate that. Looks very nice, occult. The Piltdown Gang by John Cook. Sir Arthur Keith, center wearing a lab coat. Charles Dawson, second from right. And A.S. Woodward, far right. All right, so, I mean, it's a nice drawing. The person, or it's a photo, never mind. So, okay. I mean, it's nice. Cool. And despite the fact that the Piltdown fossils were clearly doctored, highly esteemed scientists in the field affirmed their veracity. William Fix notes in The Bone Peddlers that the two most eminent paleoanthropologists in England at the time, Sir Arthur Keith and A.S. Woodward, declared that Piltdown Man represents more closely than any human form yet discovered the common ancestor from which both the Neanderthal and modern types have been derived. So let's check out the footnote, which, okay, not a big surprise, it's just what he quoted. Well, so, okay, cool. It wasn't until 1953, after the Nature Conservancy had spent a considerable amount of taxpayer money to designate the Piltdown site as a national monument, and that Dawson's Dawn Man, Piltdown, was formally declared a fake. So we got another footnote. Steve Jones, Robert Martin, and David Pilbeam, the editors, the Cambridge Encyclopedia of Human Evolution, Cambridge University Press, 1992, 448. Okay, this is great. Let's see what we got. Unfortunately, after trying to find this online, I haven't been able to do that. I did find on archive.org it exists, but it's not available to borrow or to look at for the entirety, so it's only the, I don't know, the first 10 pages are available. There was also one on, I think, academia.edu, but it's pages 395, 96, 97, not 448 like we need to read. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to find this to see what the context is. Although there is still a great deal of uncertainty as to who perpetuated the fraud, A.S. Woodward, keeper of geology at British Museum, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit priest, and Charles Dawson, the lawyer who unearthed Piltdown Man in 1912, are frontrunners in the long list of possible suspects. And checking the footnote, again, Lubenow. Okay, great. While Piltdown Man may well be ranked as one of the more notorious scientific frauds in history, it was used for 40 years to dupe unsuspecting students into thinking that evolution was a fact. This, I think, is really interesting because, first of all, it's not used, right? And Hank knows that this was disproven years ago based on when he was writing this book. So for it to be even included, it doesn't really do anything to evolution, for creationism, for any of his arguments. He's just saying sometimes people are scammers and those scams are found out. So cool. But this is also an interesting way that this is phrased, that because Piltdown Man was used, this was scamming or tricking people into thinking evolution was fact, as if evolution relied on Piltdown Man. If Piltdown Man isn't true, that means that none of evolution is true. And I think that's a very Christian way to approach it, right? If we go back to any of the stages prior to Jesus and we say this event didn't happen, all of these events are so contingent on each other that there's even the argument that if we can disprove creationism, then that throws Christianity away, because there's no Adam and Eve, and if there's no Adam and Eve, then there's no original sin, and if there's no original sin, there's no need for this, and if there's no need for this, and this, and that, right? If these guys didn't exist in the paternal lineage of Jesus, that means the Bible is containing an error, and if there's one error in the Bible, then it's wrong, that sort of thing. So this is really interesting. This is Hank coming at it from a Christian perspective, that if one thing in evolution is wrong, we can just throw out the entire section of biology, and of course we know that's not true. Peking Man. Okay, this is interesting because this is something we found with Java Man, and we're going to see the footnote because there's a footnote on the name. Peking Man, originally classified as Sinanthropus, and Java Man have both been reclassified as belonging to the same species, Homo erectus. Okay, so if you know that, and he actually doesn't cite a source, but if you know that, then why are you separating it as Piltdown Man and then, or as Java Man and then Peking Man? Let's find out. While Java Man is fictitious and Piltdown Man is a fraud, Peking Man might be best described as pure fantasy. Didn't we already have one that was described as pure fantasy? Like Nebraska Man, Peking Man was based originally on a dusty old tooth. It was conveniently discovered in China, just as Canadian physicist David Black was about to run out of funds for his evolutionary explorations in 1927. Well, let's see what this source says. Ian Taylor, In the Minds of Men, 1991. What kind of book is this? Let's find out. Okay, so this is In the Minds of Men, Darwin and the New World Order, a history of Darwin and such. Scientific arguments against evolution, scientific arguments that the Earth is very young, a discussion of atheism, secular humanism, etc. First published in January 1984. Okay, so not a unbiased source, right? Not a source that talks about Peking Man. So why should we take Ian T. Taylor seriously? Is he even somebody that has a background in this? Let's find out. Okay, we have Ian T. Taylor is a Toronto-based writer and researcher, a university graduate from London, England. He was employed for more than 20 years as a research metallurgist in the laboratories of one of North America's corporate giants. He obtained patents for high-strength weldable alloys, armor plate, and a novel process for the manufacture of heat exchangers. Sounds pretty cool. A further 5 years were spent in the field of television production, where he became a producer-writer for a science documentary series broadcast throughout the US and Canada. I don't know why they're not including the name of that science documentary series. In the Minds of Men fills a vital gap by relating the humanities to the sciences. The author is currently working on another book to fill a second vital gap relating the humanities to the spiritual life. Now that one may be more interesting, I think, for us to read, because I think we're sort of fake scienced out at this point. So yeah, really cool that it looks like he's some type of engineer. Does this mean that he is an authority who can tell us the age of the Earth? Do you know what I mean? That's a bit odd. So this text below is printed from the printed edition, or is from the printed edition inside front cover for the book, Darwin and the New World Order. Virtually everyone who reads these words at one point had to endure the public education system. Some no doubt quickly caught on to the fact that the educational success is the result of regurgitating opinions and statements that conform to the doctrines of the system. Others may have rebelled at the lack of opportunity to question that which very often is mere dogma masquerading as fact. I don't know about the classes you've taken. I never was told stop asking questions, and definitely for my students, I welcome them asking questions. I tell them that all the time. I have them, we start off the year with that. I let them know I'm not here because I'm better than you, smarter than you. I just happen to know the topic more than you probably do, and I'm interested in teaching it. That's why I'm here. I'm not perfect, and if you guys have any questions on stuff, please ask. And when we talk about things like age of certain fossils, we do dive into it a little bit, just so they understand this isn't something made up. If not stifled and deadened by this mental abuse. Oh boy. So he's not a geologist and not a psychologist. A healthy curiosity early seeks answers to these age-old questions concerning man's origin and destiny. Thus, it is disturbing to find that, under the guise of orthodox science, any kind of evidence that does not support most textbook scenario for our origins has been sedulously kept from the light of day. You mean creation? Science? Oh boy. In the minds of men in particular exposes, point by point, the fuzzy reasoning behind the textbook explanations, revealing the motivation while at the same time providing a great deal of counter-evidence that has been concealed for far too long. Thoroughly researched from original sources, like scholar and layman alike, or the scholar and layman alike, will find this source book which traces the humanistic reasoning that runs through most of the natural and social sciences. Okay, wait, traces humanistic reasoning. I thought, how is that telling us the age of the Earth? Okay. It closes by showing the evolutionary viewpoint provides support for many of the social ills of today, and on a world scale is responsible for the political drive towards the one world government. This, according to the declared humanist objective, is mankind's destiny. Well, I don't know. Maybe I haven't met a humanist who has said that, and he's met them. Maybe this was more popular in the 90s, but this actually sounds like a better version of Hank's book. Doesn't this sound like what Hank is trying to do, except this guy is claiming to actually go to the original counter arguments, to the original sources, to support what he's trying to say. Yeah, so it looks like he's... Oh boy, I guess we picked the wrong book, guys. But again, the reason for checking this is that this is a statement that doesn't come from any source beyond some guy who thinks the Earth is young. I'm sorry, some engineer who thinks the Earth is young. So I don't know why we should care that it was conveniently discovered in China just as some guy was running out of his funds for his evolutionary explorations, because why should we trust what this other person says? Now, if Hank actually read that other book and found where this was quoted, he could have actually taken where the real information comes from, or as he's done before, he'll say this comes from this source as quoted in, but he didn't do that. He just quotes this engineer who wants to tell us the Earth is young and that evolution is not true. Okay. The Rockefeller Foundation rewarded this discovery with a generous grant, permitting Black to continue digging. 2 years later, he discovered what he fervently believed was Peking Man's brain case, and he estimated Peking Man to be 500,000 years old. Unfortunately, Black's fame was fleeting, for at age 49, he died of a heart attack. Okay, so what? Again, this is from... So the next source, or the next footnotes, 15, 16, 17, this all comes from In the Minds of Men. Great. So we can't even... So not only is this irrelevant information... Okay, so what? Black died? So what? We don't even know if it's true. Black's death, however, did not end his dreams. By the time World War II broke out, the evolutionary community had discovered 14 skulls and an interesting collection of tools and teeth. All 14 skulls were missing in action by the war's end, yet the pretense persisted. So this is just telling us that according to Taylor, the metallurgy guy, these magical skulls were just missing, but people still used them because photographs and plaster casts that remained still had some interesting similarity. Apart from the fact that the lower skeletons were missing, the skulls had all been bashed at the base. As Ian Taylor points out, Teilhard de Chardin of Piltdown fame made his former professor Marcelin Boulay angry, having traveled halfway around the world to see a battered monkey skull. He pointed out that all the evidence indicated that true man was in charge of some sort of industry and the skulls were found merely of those monkeys. Again, this is just something that Taylor is saying. It's not as quoted in, it's not from anything else. So there's actually no reason for us to assume any of this is true. So thank you, Hank, for not knowing how to cite anything. Boulay was not far from the truth, as Gish pointed out in debates against evolutionists. It now seems like the tools found with Peking Man were used on him, not by him. And this is Gish and Taylor. Great. As it turns out, while monkey meat is difficult to digest, monkey brains are delicious. To this day, natives of Southeast Asia lop off the heads of monkeys, bash them in the back, and scoop the brains out and eat them is a delicacy. If you saw the movie Indiana Jones Temple of Doom, that's exactly what Jones and his cohorts had for dinner. Peking Man on the half shell. Did you get, so evolution is racist. Okay, not Hank. All right. It is now clear to anyone who looks at evidence with an open mind that Peking Man was not a distant relative, but rather dinner. Now, I'm not saying there's anything that is racist about claiming that some humans eat monkey brains, but the way that this is phrased, number one. Number two, suggesting this is like an everyday kind of practice. That's interesting. And to cite Indiana Jones, the Temple of Doom as your source. Okay. And notice there's no other sources being cited here. Great. To say that hominids like Peking Man and his partners are closely related to humans because both can walk, which is not what they're saying at all, is like saying that a hummingbird and helicopter are closely related because both can fly. And I remember thinking when I read this, I was like, you got him, Hank. In reality, the distance between an ape who cannot read or write and a descendant of Adam who can compose a musical masterpiece or send a person to the moon is in the distance of infinity. Really? Because the genetic difference is minuscule, which is pretty interesting. Also, an ape who cannot read or write, that would probably be Hank, because we count as apes, and I'm not sure that you read any of these, and you're definitely bad at writing. Here we just see a drawing of Peking Man, another product of fertile imagination. Alright, cool. All the evidence in the world, however, is not sufficient to convince those who do not want to be confused with facts. Sir, come on. Projection 101. Let's see what the footnote says. Evolutionary theory is so pervasive and has such a stranglehold on the scientific community that the pressure to conform all facts to the theory, no matter how contradictory to the theory the facts may be, is virtually insurmountable. In the field of paleoanthropology, in which the evidence for evolution is particularly scant, the proclivity to rely on subjectivism is especially noticeable. This state of affairs goes a long way toward explaining the frequency of fantasy-filled fabrications in the history of hominid fossil studies. See a creationist book written in 1993. Okay, so again, this is Hank's perception based on all these other creationist books that he claims to have read. I don't even know if Hank has read these books, quite frankly. So what? To wit, Walter Cronkite, in the television premiere of Ape Man, The Story of Human Evolution, declared that if monkeys were his newfound cousins. Cronkite went on to say, if you go back far enough, we and the chimps share a common ancestor. My father's 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 father, going back maybe 500,000 generations, about 5 million years, was an ape. So of course we are apes. We fall under that same category. You know, we've got opposable thumbs, we walk upright, we don't have a tail. This is hosted by Walter Cronkite, Entertainment Network. Cool. All right, so interesting. This has a citation, but the other thing he said didn't. Interesting. So Cronkite goes on to say that, so what? He's a journalist. Okay. So he's letting somebody know, or the viewers know, something that they can kind of understand or relate to. He's explaining it in a way that's easy to digest because he's not a biologist and he's not hosting a documentary in which he wrote and discovered all this other stuff as a paleontologist, right? So this is him just saying, hey, so here's some information. In fairness, it should be pointed out that not all evolutionists believe humans evolved from monkeys. I think nobody believes humans evolved from monkeys. Some, in fact, quite believe the opposite, that monkeys evolved from humans, okay? Jeffrey Bourne, former director of Yerkes Primate Research Center in the Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, is a classic case in point. An article in Modern People points out that Bourne, who is considered one of the world's leading experts on primates, and, quote, believes that, quote, monkeys, apes, and all lower primate species are really the offspring of man. This is definitely something that we've already talked about in the comments. This really reminds me of one of the comments that we read at the start of this video, that all of these weird fringe beliefs are being pulled out. This is one guy. It's a classic case in point. We shouldn't have a classic case in point. We should just show what people actually are saying, not what one guy thinks is true, no matter his credentials. But let's check it out. Modern People, 1976, as quoted in Gish. And then the next footnote that we're going to get is Descent of Man or Ascent of Ape, New Scientist, 1981, as quoted in Gish. Cool. So we can't even be sure that Jeffrey Bourne even says any of this stuff, because Hank didn't read it himself. He read it in Gish. Gish may have deliberately or accidentally misconstrued what was being said. Great. We'll just finish reading it for the sake of being thorough. Bourne's beliefs are bolstered by an article in New Scientist in which John Gribben and Jeffrey Scherfus say that the chimp is a descendant from man. Their hypothesis. Their theory is that the genetic changes that produced early man from an ape were cleanly reversed to produce early chimps and gorillas from man. The truth, however, is that evolutionists who believe humans evolved from chimps, they don't. Nobody believes this. Over millions of years, as well as those who believe chimps evolved from humans, are dead wrong. No citation given. No matter how many years the evolutionist postulates, chance operating on natural processes can no more create a chimp than it could create a cell. With that in mind, let's proceed to the letter C in the acronym FACE, which demonstrates that chance renders evolution not only improbable, but indeed impossible. So all of this is just Hank saying, nuh-uh, cause I don't understand this. Congratulations. So all of this, for Peking Man, all of this, the sources are some creationist book. That's it. But if we read this and accept it as true, what is he actually saying? That because that Peking Man is not an evolutionary ancestor. Okay. But what about all the ones that were known at the time this book was written? What about, I don't know, Homo heidelbergensis, Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal? What about all of these other ones? There's a lot. So in the middle, sort of top here, we have Homo naledi, and it's showing some question marks around it. We're not sure where it fits because this was the human family tree as depicted in 2015 following its discovery. So we can remove that from us talking about Hank's book because this was not found at this time. I don't know off the top of my head when all of these were found, and that's totally fine. We can look at this and we see that there's Australopithecus, we see the Homo species, we see Paranthropus, we see Ardipithecus, and we see Pan, which just includes chimpanzees and bonobos. Notice that it's not connected to the Homo sapiens species, and it is not at the bottom of the Homo sapiens species. It's not branching off. So nobody who made this believes that humans evolved from chimps or that chimps evolved from humans. First of all. Second of all, he didn't talk about Australopithecus afarensis. He didn't talk about that. He mentioned Lucy. Why didn't he disprove Lucy? Why didn't he talk about Turkana boy or anything else that would have been in the Homo erectus family? It's just the Java man and Peking man, but none of the other discoveries that were known to him at this time. Why isn't he mentioning any of these other branches in human evolution or inside human evolution, or why isn't he mentioning any of these? Is the question. It's just these two that he didn't provide any evidence against, really, and one of them that, hey, everybody realized it was a fake. Oh, and the first one that everybody realized was a fake too, right out the gate. Congratulations. Not a fake, just a misidentification. So we have one misidentification that nobody really accepted as a human ancestor, even from the start. We have two that ended up being part of Homo erectus, which he never discredited Homo erectus at all. And we have one that he listed that is a forgery. That's all he's got. I don't know if Hank thought this was a great argument. It just looks like he took other arguments from other creationists and then just regurgitated them. If he really wanted to explain how the fossil record is just not true, that these are not related to humans whatsoever, humans are a totally separate entity, they did not evolve from these guys, they are not related to these guys whatsoever, he would have broke them down all individually. Instead, he just puts stuff that you would see on, creationism.com. You know what I mean? Something that some other our young Earth creationists would say. And that's the thing. They're all kind of just passing around the same 4 cards, and they're just playing the same 4 cards, not realizing there's an entire deck that is being ignored. And if they would look at that deck, maybe they would understand why people believe in this game, right? The game that we're playing. Or is your faith not there? That's my question. Why aren't you looking at this stuff? So since we know that Hank likes to end the chapters with some quotes, we have Jacques Monod saying, "Chance alone is at the source of every innovation, of all creation in the biosphere. Pure chance, absolutely free but blind, at the root of the very stupendous edifice of evolution. The central concept of modern biology is no longer one among other possible or even conceivable hypotheses. It is today the sole conceivable hypothesis, and nothing warrants the supposition or the hope that on this score our position is ever to likely be revised." David Hume says, "Chance, when strictly examined, is a mere negative word and means not any real power which has anywhere a being in nature." Okay. I guess this is, for the next chapter here. I don't know if I like wrapping it up that way. I feel like we're trying to wrap up the chapter, but we're really introducing the next chapter. I don't know. I don't really care for that. It's just my personal feeling. It doesn't mean anything about Hank. It's just I wouldn't have chosen to do that. So were you convinced? I sure wasn't. I'm just shocked that this is really all he has. Like I was trying to say, this is like the same 4 cards that are being passed around as if this is the entire deck, when really there's an entire deck that nobody is looking at. And why aren't they looking at it? Is it that they don't know the rest of the cards exist? Or is it that they're too scared that once they get into it, their faith is going to fall apart? Because their faith seems really contingent on evolution being false. Now there's, again, plenty of Christians and other religious folk that they believe in creation with evolution. And to them, the two work together. There's not a big deal. If you want to understand that better, you got to talk to them, because I'm sure they each have their own kind of personal take on that. For me, I didn't see it as a problem because it seemed like the way that things had evolved in time that was claimed by the scientists, this seemed like to follow the way that creation happened. It happened in the ocean, and then it happened on the land, and then it happened in the air, and then humans. So for me, this was not that big of a deal once I found out more about evolution. It didn't kill my faith. So I don't know why these guys are so against reading it. It's just, at this point, it looks like an echo chamber. It's just some creationists citing each other. Who cares? Who cares what some other creationist said about evolution, the evolutionary discoveries? Go to the evolutionary discovery, who maybe is the person who wrote about it at the time, a contemporary, a journalist, or maybe the person who discovered it wrote about it themselves. Probably would have, right? If they're making scientific discoveries, they probably published a paper, maybe use that paper. But instead, we're just citing Gish, we're citing Lubenow, we're citing Taylor. Who cares? Who cares? So it's, it's something. I gotta say, I think more thought and research was put into me doing my makeup today than it was into the book that we've read thus far. With that being said, thank you guys for joining me. I always appreciate that you guys are here watching, and definitely the comments that you leave. There's a lot of great stuff that you guys have to say that far exceeds anything we've read in any of these books. It's more interesting, factual, and just entertaining. If you guys want to share more of your comments, you can check us out on the Discord, or you can find me in places like Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, those kinds of places. You can also join the cult. We have cult memberships either on YouTube, or you can join on Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you get access to early videos without any ads. And also we have just some other updates that happen. There's different videos that'll get posted, mostly just updates and conversations with you guys, sharing information or videos or photos that you guys have specifically requested of me. And also we have our group live stream at the end of each month. So looking forward to see you guys there if you want to join. And there is also a free membership you can also do for the Patreon members as well. It's a slightly different, but you still get access to most of the stuff. With that being said, as always, thanks for listening.
Train up a child in the way they should go, and they shan't depart from it. Spare the rod for the child's what we're told. They want to justify being hit. Children must obey their parents in all things. Honest pleases the Lord. But is that all I can expect from my life? Constant mission till I'm floored. What if this isn't exactly true? Where would that even leave me and you? If religion was its among his minions, why is one of them jealous? What does that even mean? Why require our worship anyway? Why does he need anything? He is the potter and we are the clay. He does what he wills. It matters not what could we even do. It's his choice to save or kill. Why create this fuss system? Where's all the alleged wisdom? If religion poisons everything, where is the antidote? Come drink the lemonade with me, erase all that guilt. Why would God create us evil and wrong, and punish us from afar? You tell us we're broken, to sell us secure, we're worthy as we are. What if I'm a doubting Thomas? Why refuse to reach out to us? If we are to seek the Lord, why does he hide of his own accord? Why give us brains to reason, but using them is highest treason?